So today I would like to be talking about wellness, working with wellness. And so to begin, we started with just a moment of silence, a moment of just grounding, and I just want to check in. And this might be the first time we've actually stopped all day. And I know you just arrived, so feel free if you want to just take a moment and just... Good, okay, cool.
I took it before I came in.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Well, I'm glad you joined us. So just a really quick slide, kind of just introduce myself and a little bit about me and what I do. I've been caregiving professionally for about 7 years now. This time, 7 years ago, I took a CNA class. I was thinking I wanted to be a nurse. I was going to nursing school, and my mom's like, you need to become a CNA before you become a nurse, because you can always tell the difference between the nurses who are CNAs and the nurses who aren't. And so I did that, and when I started doing my practicums, going into the nursing home, doing my clinical hours, I learned very quickly I did not want to become a nurse. I didn't like the passing of the pills. I didn't like the paperwork. I liked the hands-on contact. I liked being with people. I liked supporting them. Strangely enough, showers and bathing were great. Bed making? I hated bed making. But that's my personal thing. So I started out as a nursing aide, and I worked as a nursing aide in different nursing homes, different senior care communities, started working a little bit with hospice, and then eventually I had an opportunity to expand that. And so I went to a training, maybe some of you have heard the Certified Dementia Practitioner training, and that was a step in the right direction. And at that same time, I was doing a lot of volunteer work with the Alzheimer's Association, Alzheimer's and Dementia Services of Northern Indiana, and really getting my feet wet. And at the same time, I switched from this nursing major over to psychology. And during my psychology studies, one of my assignments asked me to do a family history and find out what's really common in my family. And when I did that activity, I found out that I had 5 family members who had passed from dementia. Whoa! What? That blew my mind. Here I am studying this dementia, supporting others, welcome, and 5 family members. And the only one that was recently alive, was Great-Grandma Stevens, and I was just a little kid when that happened, and I didn't know nothing about that. And at the time, it wasn't like a very supportive structure in our family where let's go and say hi and let's spend time with her. It was a distancing sort of thing. We don't know what dementia is. Let's not talk about it. Everything's fine. Anyone can understand what that's like, right? So I started working with a company called Comfort Keepers. It's an in-home senior care organization, and I started teaching. I started sharing their caregivers, and I was like super passionate about what do we do? How do we move forward with what we do as caregivers? And from there, it really spiraled out. First, I was teaching a 2-hour Alzheimer's class and a 2-hour home safety class. Over a couple months, that turned into a 6-hour Alzheimer's class and then a 6-hour home safety class, and things began to shift. I began to notice different things in the way I was teaching, the way I was caring, and then I met the Teepa Snow, and whoa, the way I taught changed. I thought, there's something different here. There's something real here. So I put that into the room. I brought those different scenarios. I became real. I became interactive. I became the dummy patient, so to speak. I role-played in those positions and challenged the caregivers that I was working with. So if we were talking about Parkinson's, I would simulate Parkinsonian symptoms. If we were talking about dementia, I would show maybe aphasia or language problems and really challenge the caregivers in that moment to let's play with it. Let's try it now, and we can get dirty now because we'll wash our hands and then go to the client, right? So from here, I was like, oh, what else can I do? So I became a lifeguard. I was like, yes, this is great. And I started doing that and became a swim coach. And I started working with little kids. So I'm working with seniors and little kids, and I'm like, there's a lot that is very similar between these populations. The way you approach them, the way you engage them, the amount of energy you bring into the room, what kind of energy you bring into the room is really, really important. And from here, I sat in a chair for 16 hours, literally, and I went through what's called an Ageless Grace educator training. And I don't know if you've heard of Ageless Grace, but it is a mind and body brain fitness program where it's ideally suited for individuals who are in a wheelchair. It can be done with ages 5 to 105 safely. And it's a lot of movement. There's 21 different tools that we use, and from here, I was like, what else can I do? What else can I was just like hungry, thirsty. What can I do? What can I do? I'm learning. And next thing I know, there's the caregiving consultant. I was on Denise's website, caregiving.com, for, I would say, 4 or 5 years before the caregiving consulting training came around. And I wasn't really active on there. I was just dabbled in here and there because, honestly, there's a lot of stuff on that website, right? There's a ton of information on there. So I kind of was drowning in there. Good thing I was a lifeguard, right? And then I took the educator training, and I was like, okay, I can do this. And I was really challenged because on the day of my educator training, I lost a family member. So I was actively working with grief. And then how do I share? How do I bring this stuff? And the reality became for me is I can't separate that intensity from the message that I share. I can feel my pain and I can share my pain because somehow that fuels the fire, my energy, that grief work. So, long story short, from there, actively grieving, I was like, you know what, let's make a decision. I'm going to move to Boulder. So I moved out to Boulder, Colorado, and I currently am studying Mindfulness-Based Transpersonal Counseling. Now, that's a mouthful. Is anyone familiar with mindfulness? You're not? Okay, so we'll get a brief introduction to what that looks like, and then I'll kind of articulate a little bit about the transpersonal side, and we'll kind of bring it all together. And lastly on that list, I am an expectant family caregiver. My uncle is currently showing signs of dementia, and it's like I've been studying this, I've been, diving deep into it, but now it's like I'm noticing like I'm pushing back. I'm like, no, not me, not again, not now. I know it. It's here, it's going to happen. And what we do as expectant caregivers is we ask those questions and we prepare and we make the plans now. And it's hard. It's much harder than it is reading it off of a screen, I tell you that. And we have all had these difficult conversations. I'm assuming that's a big assumption, but that's why we're here, right, as caregivers. So let me kind of phrase this mindfulness and then the transpersonal component to get you a feel for where I'm coming from in my approach and kind of highlight and expand on where we're going today. So this mindfulness component simply is referring to being present with whatever's going on, whether that's I'm noticing that I really don't want to be here right now, or I'm noticing that I am sleepy, or I'm noticing that I'm hungry, or I'm noticing this. So mindfulness on it's like a spectrum. So it's very small. It's a noticing. It could be on the other side where there could be a deep meditative trance. We've heard of monks who go into their trance-like meditations for hours at a time. That's way out there for me. I don't know how to do all that. I'm like 30 minutes is my max for sitting at one spot at one time. And over the past 4 years, I've learned different mindfulness techniques. I originally took a mindfulness-based stress reduction class. It was an 8-week class that really taught me how to approach my stress, and not that it got rid of my stress, but how to really develop coping skills to work with myself, to work with mindfulness, to work with whatever's coming up in every moment. And I found after 4.5 weeks, suddenly there was like this new person inside me observing what was going on, like, oh, you're angry, you're sad, you're upset. And slowly this began a quest, a journey of self-love and self-recovery and self-growth. And let me tell you, it's been a lot. Because coming from a traumatic childhood with abuse and stuff like that, I didn't know how to engage my emotions. I was a caregiver, but I barely knew how to engage in empathy. I knew how to be sympathetic. Oh, I see what's going on, I'm going to help you, I can be compassionate. But the empathy component was kind of stuck on me. And mindfulness really helped me engage what's going on in me, allowed me to bring a sense of awareness and curiosity to my states, my emotions, my feelings, and eventually it was like one day out of the blue, I was like, whoa, so that might be what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. And then it expanded, this sense of empathy grew, and I was like, whoa, we need to bring this into the caregiving field. I got super excited about that, and I was like, yes. So I tried to do that, and it seemed like the lessons got much more challenging, from getting punched and kicked and bit and spit on and pooped on my head. Yeah, that did happen. All sorts of crazy things in the caregiving scenario that we don't expect, but we can bring an awareness to, a curiosity to, and maybe some acceptance. We can learn to reject some things, but this mindfulness component helps us bring a sense of curiosity. So that's why we started this circle, sitting in silence. I just wanted you to take a moment to yourself, to breathe, to notice, and see what's going on. And that is a kind of a light introduction to mindfulness. It's an awareness of what is here, what is now, and how do we work with that. So I want to kind of formulate how we work with that. And the second part of my title, Mindfulness-Based, so that's that, Transpersonal Counseling. So transpersonal refers to that which extends beyond the person, across. So trans, like transcontinental railroad. So it's across the country or across continents. So transpersonal refers to combining Eastern and Western philosophies. So we have this Western scientific allopathic medicine, and we also have a lot of Eastern traditions. So this might be traditional Chinese medicine. This could be paths of enlightenment, different wisdom traditions. So transpersonal really tries to include all of those things to help us understand how people work. Because as a future therapist, I can't assume that you follow into my worldview. And furthermore, I can't place my worldview on you. So my education and my understanding comes from this place of curiosity and wanting to know, well, how do you tick and what helps you work? And we'll get into a little bit more details on that in a little bit. So that's kind of the framework that I'm at and what we're working with. So the question and the objectives we have today is we're going to define wellness. We're going to define the elderly, which I think we all know what the elderly is, right? But next we have welderly and elderly. So I'm going to kind of introduce this as a paradigm shift. So welderly and elderly. Oftentimes we look at the healthcare system and we just see this person is sick, this person is ill. We want to give them medicine and get them out of here. We think of them as a problem. Oh, they're going back to the hospital, another doctor's visit, another medication, another this, another illness. Repeating itself over and over and over. And the challenge is to not see those illnesses or those maladies or those sicknesses as a problem, but really see those as an opportunity for growth, an opportunity to really get to know that experience. Well, what is it like to actually have the flu? Or what is it actually like to feel tired and groggy? And learning to bring some awareness and acceptance. Because when you're sick and you got the flu, there's not much you can do besides, wait it out. And so learning to be with that in a state of acceptance rather than rejection. And so a way we could do that is kind of introducing the wellness wheel. So I want to open this up to you and ask you, what does it mean to be well? What does it mean to be well to you? And if you want to do this, we can do that. If you don't want to be on the mic, that's okay too. So does anyone have an idea? What does it mean to be well for you?
So for me, wellness is a physical and a spiritual component. If my physical body is okay, it's not quite as hard for me to reach that spiritual, I'm okay with the world's okay with me. That's how I define that.
My first thought on wellness is contentment. And so you're physically content and you're psychologically content and you're not in an anxious or dissatisfied state.
I would say energetic, emotionally, physically, and sharing that energy with loved ones.
Thank you.
Yeah, I kind of say ditto, 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 and just that they all fit. When I'm spiritually well, then I'm usually physically well and emotionally well, psychologically well. When one gets out of balance, then sometimes they have to pick up. But it's that whole package of waking up saying I'm happy who I am, and let's start the day.
I agree all the way around. I love how everyone articulates it a little bit different, but it's the same, but a little bit adjusted for each person, and that's part of wellness too. Wellness for each person is different. What is wellness? So that's really cool. So this is really neat to hear the different ways that people are well, and they're all good. They're all really great responses, I think. Anyway, sorry.
I think it's a little bit of it's not being in pain, so it's a physical aspect. It's not even necessarily not being sick. It's not being in pain, and then having enough to do, but not too much. So when we're looking at a an older patient, you're looking at somebody who may not even have enough to do to be spiritually well or even physically well. They just don't, they're not occupied. Whereas if you're looking at a younger patient, they may have so much to do that, or a caregiver, they may have so much to do that they could not possibly be either physically or mentally well. It's having that balance and enough to do and pain being managed.
Thank you. Good comments all around. I'd say good humor, the ability to laugh at myself, and also to make others laugh. Not that I'm good at that.
I don't know that I have anything to add, except that I do know that I don't when you're not well in any of these categories, for me, I sometimes say, oh my gosh, I wasn't thankful enough or aware enough of when I was well. I need to be more cognizant of taking it in when things are all good and right.
Thank you. Yeah, so there's a lot of common themes here. I think we have a very similar definition of wellness, and I will challenge you a little bit on some of those offerings, so the anxiety and the pain, but we'll get to that. But I want to challenge that. Yes, ma'am.
Can I just add one more thing?
Yeah.
So it kind of summarizes. For me, it's to be at peace. So psychologically, emotionally, physically, like when you take that moment, to be at peace and at rest. And if you can do that, then you feel well in all those aspects.
So it's more than a feeling, though. Feeling part of it is part of it, right? Yeah. Okay. So let's go ahead and dive a little deeper into this. I think this really highlights a lot. As you can see on this chart, we're looking at elderly populations and the individuals at age 65, what we're currently looking at and what we're currently expecting over the next 35 years. That's a big increase in some different areas of the world, especially looking at South America, doubling. Most of these populations are doubling around the world. So what does that mean? As helpers and healers and caregivers, we need to be ready. I've heard it before. I like to call it the silver tsunami is coming. Right? We got to learn how to surf. Say that again? Yeah. Silver tsunami. Yeah, so you can learn to surf, you can learn to swim, you can learn to be a lifeguard like me. So there's different components related to that, right? Maybe as a marine biologist, you got to be. Who knows? There's different components. So this is just a kind of framing that if we don't do anything now, this problem is just going to cascade and get much bigger. So let's kind of look at elderly versus elderly. So I want to actually bring our attention to the elderly side first, because that's what we're used to hearing, used to seeing. And so this is allopathic. This is the standard medical model that we have here in America and a lot of westernized worlds. This tends to be exclusive. So if you can pay for it, come on in. That's the hard fact and reality of it. If you're a European American individual, come on in. But if you're Hispanic, or if you're African American, or if you're Indian, or if you're Asian, the chances are the system is not going to be inclusive to your beliefs, to who you are as an individual, to your cultural systems. And this next part, the innate sin, the evil human nature, now this is not attacking any religious beliefs in any sense, but what I'm trying to highlight and underscore is that some individuals walk around the world feeling like there is no good ever in humans ever. And I think that we've kind of demonstrated that this weekend, that there really is goodness in people's hearts. We often see that the caree is seen as a burden, like I just got to take care of mom, and if I don't take care of mom, I'll just put her in a nursing home. All right, that's the common theme that I've been hearing for many years. And again, this is a recover and regulate. So we'll get them well, we'll keep them well, and that's it. That's all we got to do. Just maintain, maintain, maintain. And lastly, it's goal-oriented. We want to see that they're making progress in their care plan, that they're recovering, that they're step, 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 step. There's really not a chance to rest in that worldview. So the challenge I want to introduce is shifting to Welderly, a holistic framework where we include all those different components of wellness that we all introduced, that is inclusive, that is open to different cultures, that is open to different language, that is open to different personality types. And there's this concept of basic goodness or brilliant sanity, that no matter what a person is doing, that they're trying to find a sense of wholeness. They're trying to reach wellness, even if that means that the individual's snorting cocaine or shooting up drugs. And this is really challenging. The person who picks up the bottle of alcohol every single day, that person is trying to figure out how to regulate themselves. That person is trying to figure out how to cope with whatever they're experiencing, whether that's early childhood trauma, even late in life trauma, or that's other forms of emotional or spiritual processes going on. So the Swiss cheese model refers to honoring what's here and valuing those spaces. Because when you purchase Swiss cheese, you don't get mad at the Swiss cheese because it has holes in it, right? No, you buy it by the pound, so the holes don't make any difference. You really honor what's here, right? And so the last component of is really going with the flow, is really being present and being aware of what's really going on with you. And it's not just, oh, I'm fine, right? I'm fine. That's okay. And leave it at that, because that might be, I'm fine at a surface level, but there might be a lot of stuff underneath there. Different components of us, right? The physical component, that spiritual component, the emotional component that we talked about. Okay. So, here's the Mindful Moments Wellness Wheel. I'll just let you take a look at that. There's a lot to take in, so just take a look and see if you're really drawn to a specific area or something that you're not used to seeing before. And then we'll go through this all the way around, and I'll paint a little story. Working with one of my clients, I noticed his physical body. I noticed that he was experiencing no pain, thank goodness. But what was happening for him is that he was progressively losing the ability to move his limbs from his neck down. He wouldn't lose speech, but the rest of his body was gradually diminishing. And over and over, falls would happen. First it was just running with his dog, and then it was a biking accident, and then it began to extend beyond there. And now it's the trauma of falling, of not being able to pick myself back up. And so we consider his health and we explore, well, what information do we have about him? Well, we know he was an athlete, we know he was physically well, but we know now that he currently has very little muscle in his limbs. So he can't stay warm, he can't maintain his own body heat. So he relies on external, that's a heating blanket or a sauna, or something to promote that heat and warmth with him. And so we look at the different systems that are in play, the different structures that are available to us. And in Boulder, we have a lot of health support systems. He is financially well off, so he can afford to participate in certain healthcare systems. Functionally, his behavior is, I would say, very enthusiastic. I would say his behavior has changed over the past couple months. My relationship with him has changed. We're spending less time doing things. We're spending more time just having conversations and being. Other behaviors he might have, well, he might cry, he might express himself, he might yell, but that's a normal expression for him. Sometimes when you have no mobility, sometimes you just want to let it out. And that's okay. We have to consider his safety. So what are the different factors that come into consideration? Well, obviously, when we're moving, we're doing different transfers. We have to be awareness of space. We have to consider that if he's going out in the neighborhood, anything below 60 degrees puts him at risk, because having no muscles, he can't produce body warmth again. So we have to consider that as a level of safety. For his skill sets, we want to know, well, what does this individual do? What has he done in his past? This individual has specialized in computer sciences. He was a computer genius, one of the early beginners in the 80s starting this. And so what skills can translate? Well, he's good on the computer and he can still type a little bit, so we want to encourage those forms of expression. He's an engineer, and so he can create different contraptions. He comes up with these different ideas. We want to foster his skill set. We consider the different technologies that are available. For those of you who joined the technology panel, you've seen the video. This is the client that I'm describing. Technology such as making your own lifts in home, whether this is a dog alarm or a lift, or this is a in-home sauna where you can hook up a lighting system to warm the body up. There's a lot of technologies that are available, and we want to expand and bring awareness to those different to support him. Energetically, we consider the intake, the output, how much is he urinating, is it frequent, is it infrequent, what are his allergies, what are his dietary needs. The man used to eat a lot, but now, since he doesn't have muscles, his body doesn't require as much food. So there's a fine line between malnourishment and getting just what you need with him. And you also want to consider that as our body ages, sometimes different things don't like us. For him, he used to love onions. Now onions don't work with his system too well. I didn't know that until, you can figure that out for yourself. There was movement, right? And that movement is something that we want to encourage. We want to encourage physical movement. We want to encourage maybe spiritual movement. We want to encourage these different flows of energy, but we also want to encourage rest, right? So with our range of motion activities that we're doing with our carees, we also want to balance that rest levels. For him, he might be up for 4 hours, then he has to lay down for a half an hour. Then he's up for a half an hour, then he's down for a half an hour. Then he's up for a half an hour, then he's down for a half an hour. And that process, while it's taxing and it's time consuming to go up and down and to do all these transfers, that's what he really needs in order to feel well. A trip around the neighborhood can tax him for the rest of the day. We have to take those things into consideration because our energy levels are going to be different than the ones we're supporting. As we consider the stress in his life, obviously not having mobility is his number one stressor. And then there's the medical supply companies. Oh boy. Trying to get a wheelchair for the past, we started this journey to get a wheelchair for him in February. They brought one in late September, and it didn't work with his body because in that time, he'd gotten progressively weaker. To the current control systems, were not working. And so now he's got a wheelchair sitting in his garage for 2 months that he can't use. That's frustrating. That's stress. We want to consider what is blocking an individual's energetic flow. His ups and downs, his emotions, his stress, his anxiety. What allows a release of that? Maybe it's crying. Maybe in his situation, it's lying with his dog and playing with his dog and watching his dog play. He can no longer play, so when I come in and I serve him, the playtime with the dog, that provides a flow of energy, a wealth of nourishment to his spirit. We also want to consider the coping strategies that this individual has. We all have different coping strategies. We practiced one at the very beginning, just sitting quietly. I'm sure we have a lot more. Again, lastly, with energetic, we consider the finances. Short-term, long-term, and then what other services are available if we are low income. But if we're high income, how can we use our place of privilege to support the less fortunate? And then we transition over to emotional, right? This is like energetic, energy in motion. I like to think of emotions as. So a couple things to consider is that oftentimes, and I'm going to speak for me, but this may be true for you, but men are not allowed to express caring, compassionate sides of them. They're not allowed to express sadness, and they're not allowed to cry in public. Has that been true for you?
Definitely.
That has been true for you, yeah?
I would not feel comfortable with that.
Yeah. So that's a kind of a social conditioning where, ladies, tell me if this is true. It's not okay for you to be angry, especially in public. Have you ever been told that? Don't be angry. Don't show your anger. Don't express yourself that way. Why aren't you smiling? Yeah. Right? Those are social constructions that we have to really challenge because we don't always have to smile. We don't always have to put on an outward barrier. We can be ourselves. And that's one thing that helps us be well is being authentic. If that means not smiling all day, all right. We don't have to. But it's also allowing that space for self-care, to express our emotions, to dive deep into our emotions, to letting those anger moments actually go through us, to sit with them instead of instantly turning to the pillow and punching it, right? Letting the anger happen. Yes, ma'am?
I have a question.
Yeah.
About men in emotions. So I know this is totally kind of a sidebar, but I'm kind of stuck on it. So was that conditioned at home, or was that conditioned societally? Like if you were in a sport, like you throw like a girl kind of thing, which is hilarious because girls, if they're not taught how to throw, they just throw the way they're not taught, and I threw like a girl and I played left field because I knew how to throw like a girl really well. So anyway, so my point is that conditioned at home or society? And what is it like if you really are upset and you would need to cry, like at a funeral or someplace where it's like kind of a safe place, in a sense, to cry? That's my question. I know it's a side thing, but it's something that's been on my mind for a long time. Yeah.
Would you like to respond?
Sure. Put you on the spot.
Uh-huh.
You can cry if you want to.
No, I don't want to cry. But I think it's a combination of both. I think the message that I would get growing up, I have two sisters, and so I'm the oldest. So the message that I got is that, you have to take care of them. So the last thing you would want is to be sad or upset about something. Like when my parents got divorced, it was really sad, but my sisters were really upset. So I had to be kind of taking care of them, or I saw that as part of my job. And then from a work standpoint, is that just looks weak, or I was told anyway that looks weak, and if you cry, it's a sign of weakness. And so you wouldn't I could cry in front of you mentioned pet, a dog, because my dog wouldn't judge or feel bad, but I would feel uncomfortable doing that, certainly around anybody that I worked with. Maybe if I had, one other person I was with and it was just us, but no, not in a group setting. That's where it came from.
So then, ladies, so here, I am really sorry to take this, but this is, ladies, if this was a coworker and you saw him cry for whatever reason, as women, what would you think? Because for me, it was like, oh, well, okay, there's something that happened, and what happened that we can work on to make the situation better. I would never see you as weak, ever. So there's, yeah, so.
People don't cry at work generally.
Yeah, but I use that as an example. So it doesn't have to be work. You could be playing golf and just really had a bad shot and really let it all out.
So
Because it feels very intimate. Crying is very intimate. And so I would do that with somebody that I felt very intimate with, but not with somebody that I work with or that I know on a casual basis. It is, I think, easier for me or for men in general, I think, to express anger, because that's more acceptable and you're pushing back. But crying feels vulnerable. I like the feeling. I rarely do it. But I mean, if I ever do feel that way, it's a release. But it doesn't happen very much.
So yeah, absolutely. So two things: vulnerability and acceptance.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge. Allowing ourselves to feel vulnerable and accepting that and being with that is very challenging, because that leads us to the next point, the social aspect, right? Cultural components, early attachment research relating to how in the first 3, 4, 5 years of life, whether the child is receiving their needs, and if they're not receiving their needs, how do they relate? Are they ambivalent in their relationships where they're kind of coming and going, uncertain? Are they more chaotic and they had early childhood trauma? Or maybe they're more distant, where it's like they're kind of an island all to themselves. Just different ways of relating to individuals. We want to consider their support systems available to them. With specifically my client, he's got a lot of support. He had, at one time, 25 caregivers, and then he took the weed whacker to that, and now he's only got about 6. Sometimes you have to, because sometimes when you have a lot of support, you really gotta, trim and find out, well, what is truly supportive for me in my life? Communication comes in really strong here. If there's a language barrier, we have to be aware of that. If there is a form of verbal communication, maybe this person's cussing all the time, we have to look between the lines and what also is not being said. Look at their body language. What is their body language saying? For individuals who are nonverbal, is there a mismatch between, yeah, I'm fine, but I'm actually crying, right? Sometimes that happens. You consider their family structure, their friend structure, and then the community at large. Are they in an impoverished community? And if so, how does that affect their support systems, the way they communicate in their culture? Moving a little aside from the social into the intellectual, we want to consider what this individual is learning and what can be learned at this moment in their life. What is this lesson of, I am not allowed to cry in public teaching me? Or I'm not allowed to or someone's telling me to smile. What can I learn about myself in that moment when someone says this to me and it's the 15th time that I've heard it this week and I'm sick and tired of hearing it, right? So we want to consider our mental activity, our thoughts, our emotions is a part of that, but more generally, is it thinking grandiose? Is it catastrophizing, turning a small situation into apocalypse narrative? At this moment, we also consider that thoughts are just passing thoughts. They come, they go, they come, they go. They're going to always come and they're going to always go. If you can try to think about one thing for a long time, I'm sure you'll find out that that thing changes. And try it. Seriously, that's my challenge, is try to think about one thing for 30 minutes, and I guarantee you won't be able to do it, because your mind will go here, and here, and here, and here, and here, and here, and here. And that's kind of similar to what mindfulness is a training back to one central focus. So you could actually do a mindfulness activity on a thought, like compassion. What is compassion? So I think about compassion, I sit with compassion, spend some time, and the next thing I know, I'm thinking about what I'm going to be doing next week and the grocery list. And when I notice that, it's like, oh, okay, let's come back to compassion. Okay. And then that in and of itself is an act of compassion, bringing that gentleness to yourself, refocusing on that. Also in this area, intellectually, you want to consider the different ideas that are in play. We're sharing ideas now. We're sharing ideas at this conference. What other ideas from different world traditions are available? We want to consider that. And we want to consider different individuals' rituals. Some people like rituals. Some people don't like rituals. Some people like routine. Some people don't like routine. What I can say is, helpers and healers, establish your own self-care ritual. What really helps you show up for your loved one? Practice that. Identify those rituals, and they'll change over time. Sometimes a ritual can be hand washing. Instead of doing a quick and go and run out, maybe it's taking actually a minute to wash my hands, feel the warmth, feel the skin, feel the contact, and knowing that that's an act of love to myself and to the person I'm serving. And then the last component is prosto. This is a philosophical, religious, existential, spiritual, transpersonal, or otherwise. So one of those things we can't exactly think, call, define. What is it? What is it? It's presto. It's that point in your life where something has changed and it's never going to be the same. It's that aha moment. And sometimes we have a lot of those in 1 year. Sometimes it's a couple years before it happens. For me, I've noticed about every 7 years I have an aha moment, and it's like, my life can't be the same. It has to change. And there's different spiritual, there's different personal components to that, philosophical, there might be some religious if you define yourself as religious, but we also want to consider that other individuals might have differing religious beliefs, or they might abstain from that. They might be atheists, and those individuals it might be easier to relate that to them on an existential basis. Meaning, why am I here? What is the value of life? What are these big questions of choice and responsibility? And how do we bring those into the world? So the challenge is, friends, if you have an issue, if you have a question, if you have a concern, put it in the middle, in that little space in there. And then begin to identify, well, what's going on in the body? What's going on with my behavior? What's going on with the energy levels? So we can take anger, right? We're allowed to express anger. We're allowed to feel anger. We throw anger in the middle. What happens in anger? Well, I notice I get tight and tense. I know emotionally it's flared up energy. I feel really, really like high energy, high voltage. Socially, right? We're allowed to express anger. Intellectually, well, maybe I don't always learn something, but maybe I learn something afterwards when I express my anger. And then I can also resource myself into the different philosophical or religious traditions where anger is talked about, whether that's going to the Bible and looking at different hymns, whether it's going to the Quran, whether it's going to different other religious texts, maybe it's going to non-secular texts for self-improvement techniques or other different types of philosophies where we can explore what is going on and what is my relationship to anger. But we can also put our loved one in the middle of there. Think about your loved one for just a second and put them in the middle and just look around that wheel. And I'd like to pass this around, and if you could share one thing that stands out to you about your loved one that you see on this wheel that you haven't thought about before. So if anyone wants to start that. And if that's too much, that's okay too. No, and so I appreciate that. Because what you still have is that relationship. And you have that in you. And so that's there too. Because that's your relationship with them. And I don't want to put anyone on the spot. maybe that was a challenging question. But that's sometimes what I do, is I challenge. And what you can do is you can take the handout and you can do this at home. You can put that relationship between your loved one and yourself in there and explore those different areas of wellness and ask yourself, well, what does it mean to be well physically or functionally or spiritually? And just explore. And so I want to pause here, and I want to take a look at the time. I think we have 10 to 12. Okay, so we have just a few more minutes. And so I want to pause here. And again, go into that moment, that space of silence, and if that's okay. And just take about a minute and just be here right now with whatever's going on, whatever emotion you're feeling, whatever physical sensation, whatever energies are present with you. Maybe this is a presto point and something's changing for you. Just be here with that for just a minute. And take a moment to bring some compassion to yourself and bring some love to yourself, and know that by being here today, by listening, by choosing to come, this is an act of love. This is an act of compassion. This is storing up treasures for yourself. And I thank you, and I would like to turn it over to questions if you have any. Thank you so much.
I just answer your question from before. One of the things that I hadn't noticed with my mom and my stepdad, I think is the emotional and their purpose right now. They're 87 and with issues, and so I think I've put them in maybe a hexagon box. I don't think I've quite squished them into a square, but I hadn't really thought about what they feel their purpose is still. We've had discussions about many other things, but not about what is their, why do they get up every morning in their life? So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'll just share an insight that I was thinking about. I've often thought of caregiving, because I'm a caregiver for both my parents, my mom and my stepdad, that it's something to be solved. And what I look at when I look at all this is that it's a process, and it doesn't have to have an answer. Like, part of it is just that I'm there, and I don't have to, I'm not going to be able to fix it. And so that's reassuring. It's a good feeling. It makes me calmer.
So I had a question about the wellness circle or wheel. Is it intended for caregivers, or is it intended for those being cared for? That's one question. I'm trying to get a perspective. And, it's too hard for me to share a personal right now. But if you can respond, and maybe I might have the strength to share, but...
I think the beauty of it is that you can do with it what you want. If you have a personal problem, you can put it in there. If it's about you, identifying who am I as a person, really exploring each of these, you'll have a couple pieces of paper. And for those of us who are writing books, there's your content right there, right? You can do a chapter for each one of those sections. If it's for your loved one, it can be done for care planning. Knowing that this is an assessment. And if you look at the typical care plan, think about what things are not up there, right? What is usually included in a care plan, right? Bullet points, this. But there's a lot of stuff that's also not addressed. So it's fairly open to you, and it's open to you how you would like to use it. Yeah, absolutely. I got time for one more question?
I'm sorry. Here I go. This is what I took. Well, I don't mean to be talking, but my brain is just like pinging all over the place. And when you mentioned about not wanting to share, it's really interesting that the reason. Two things. So one, it's immediately where my brain went. What will it be like when my parents are gone? And that wheel for my father would be emotional. That's where it, and then you talked about compassion. This is what I'm coming away with. This is a huge moment for me. What is compassion? What is meant by compassion? What is it meant to be compassionate? What is compassion to me? And how do I show compassion? Never thought about that before. So thank you so much.
I just have a comment on using it and how and where. What came to me was almost going back to that initial question when you said, what is wellness? And when we noticed what isn't well is taking a moment when you maybe have that, your wellness is at a balance. So you know that you're going to this doctor today, and you know that every time you leave, you are ready to punch a wall, or that you don't get an answer. Maybe it's that, maybe it's the behavior, maybe it's the sadness of not having what you used to be able to have. But noticing when you're out of balance, using it personally and putting that in the middle, and then doing the reflection. Where is it? Where am I feeling that in my body? Is that affecting my own? Am I unsafe in this? Or am I making a story up about feeling unsafe? Is there an energetic blockage? Am I not eating? Am I feeling sick? Where am I? Like almost doing that as a reflection, almost on a daily basis. Where am I in this? And then being able to go into whatever the wellness fix is. This is very cool. I think you can do that. It's just a very cool tool.
Well, thank you so much for those comments. And the last thing I'll say is there might not be a fix, and that's one of the approaches here. And that's probably the most challenging part.
That's the 3 seconds I needed to have in this whole conference.
Well, thank you.
Not an answer I wasn't looking for.
Yeah. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me today, and I really appreciate and honor each one of you, and I really thank you for the work that you do with your loved ones and the work that you've done and the work that you're going to do in the future. I'm excited. Thank you so much.
Thanks.